So what do we know about recreational pump-out facilities? Like I mentioned, we have about 100 pump-out, stationary pump-outs, and about 13, actually I think it's 14 now, pump-out boats in the Puget Sound area. And they are located generally in areas where you have the higher density of boats. This number is well above and beyond what EPA requires for the number. And we also wanted to confirm that the locations were good. We don't want people to have to go too far out of their way to get to those pump-out stations. So on the recreational side, we are in great shape there. So type 2s. I know we have at least one commercial person in here, so I'll talk a little bit about the type 2 quality. And again, this is very similar to the type 1s and what we're seeing, what comes out of the vessels. This is again a study done in EPA of your traditional type 2 marine sanitation device. Fecal coliform average was over 2 million. So 2 million fecal, and again that standard is 14 for a water quality standard. It also goes into the chlorine being significantly high compared to the water quality standards. VOD is your oxygen, basically. That if your VOD is too high, you have too many organics going in the water, and then that can create a low dissolved oxygen issue for aquatic life. And the standards, again, were significantly high. Commercial vessels, the numbers we have out there, about 3,000 ocean-going vessels, and about 700 that stay more specific to the Puget Sound area. We broke that out into all the different types. We also looked at which ones are doing what. We also looked at the density of commercial vessels, because you might not have a huge number of state ferries, but they're out there all the time. They're out there every day going back and forth. Tugboats are out there all the time. Whereas some of your commercial traffic is coming in and out, where there might be seasonal with some of the, the commercial fishing, where they're only, they go up to Alaska for most of the season. So we looked at all of this density to figure out what vessels are here and where they're at. So again, I mentioned that about 3,600 commercial vessels, there's about 215 of those that need to add holding capacity. So the vast majority of commercial vessels, again, are either already using pump-out stations like the state ferries, the Navy vessels, your Victoria Clippers and your Argosy ships. Those are all using pump-outs already. Or you have the commercial vessels that are in and out and they're discharging out at sea. And then you have some that may be using pumper trucks when they're in the port. So of those vessels, yeah, there's about 200 that we need to add that holding. With the tugs, who we've been meeting with quite a bit, they've indicated their estimated cost for a retrofit is significant. It's about $125,000 to add that holding tank. They have to go through a lot more steps along the way to be able to put a holding tank in a commercial vessel versus a recreational. So we're working on taking that into account. They have to go through design, engineering, Coast Guard approvals. So we have in our draft petition, there is a phased timeline for some of those commercial vessels. So they have time to make those retrofits. They have to go into dry dock to do that. So we're timing it with when they go into dry dock. So I mentioned those advisory group meetings. We've had a couple of advisory group meetings where we brought in those stakeholders to talk about 3 key elements. One was geography, helping us along the way to figure out, do we do this for the whole Puget Sound? Do we do it for certain segments of Puget Sound, or none at all? The majority of the folks, and not everyone in the room agreed, because that never happens, but the majority of the group cited that doing the full Puget Sound would be the most protective. It would be the least confusing to vessels, so ease of implementation. The cons that were cited with doing the full site were mostly the cost of the retrofitting and the operational changes. They'd have to be going to those pump outs more frequently. That takes time away from the work that's being done. So with that geography, again, we layered lots of that data, and what you'll see on some of the maps upcoming is just how the shellfish areas are everywhere. If you layer all these layers of shellfish areas, aquatic land, sensitive resources, fecal coliform listings, all these different elements, it's such a vast area of the Puget Sound, it would be hard to segment off certain areas. Infrastructure, we also talked a lot about that and learned more about some of the challenges that certain vessel classes had with the infrastructure, identifying certain locations where more pump outs would be needed. On the commercial side, we're working on adding a few more stationary pump outs to give vessels, commercial vessels, yet another option on how and where to discharge their holding tanks. And then we also talked about implementation. There was a great brainstorming session of how to do implementation, and we also layered that with what we've learned from other states as well. So the status, as I mentioned before, we have made a decision to proceed with a draft petition. That will be sent to EPA at the same time we send it out to public comment, and that's going to be happening very soon. And so that is a 60-day public comment period. We have, like I mentioned, that first option under the Clean Water Act, where we're going to show the water quality protection, but also show that pump out availability. We're doing the entire Puget Sound, and I have a map next that shows that, the inland marine waters. We also included Lake Washington, Lake Union, and the Ship Canal, because so many of those vessels go back and forth between that. We didn't want to create what some states have seen, kind of dumping zones. As soon as you're out of an area, that there could be a dumping zone there. We also will, like I mentioned, allow that time for some of the commercial vessels to make those retrofits. And we'll continue those infrastructure improvements. That's something, once you establish, discharge zones, that's something that will continue, and it has continued over the years. It's drastically improved over the years. And then obtaining, of course, the input. So here's that map that shows the area that we're talking about. We use the very commonly known lighthouses, at least on the commercial side. It's very commonly known. Discovery Lighthouse, New Dungeness Lighthouse, and the line in between that. That's also the area for tug assist. So it's a common line in the water, and then everything inland from there. The Strait of Jankowiak, first of all, has just a lot of through traffic, not so much the vessels staying in an area. And there's not as many pump outs in that area, so we didn't feel that that was the right area to include in the no discharge zone. But everything up to the border with Canada.
Question?
Yes?
What sort of coordination has been done then with the Gulf Islands and what's going on in Canada?
Yeah, there's been some communications with Canada. They also have a no discharge zone program up there, and there are some areas of no discharge zones up in Canada, so it's an option they can use as well. The vessels up there have to have a holding tank. If you have a registered vessel up there, you do need to have a holding tank. So there's a lot of the Canadian vessels that are already prepared for that. So there has been some coordination there. Does that answer your question? And then the implementation, just wanted to touch base on this a little bit as well. The outreach and education that's looked at as the key strategy. Other states have had the most success with focusing on the outreach and education, making sure people know why they shouldn't be dumping their sewage, making sure people know where the discharge zone is and how to get to pump out stations. There does need to have that backbone of enforcement, looking at how other states have done it. This is often done as a combination with Coast Guard, with their existing programs on commercial, but also state and local authority. What we've been starting conversations with are some of the agencies that are already out there. We don't want to add yet another agency or another group doing additional inspections. We want to build off of existing programs and do cross-training so that resources, you wouldn't be adding too many resources, financial, and we also don't want to add more boardings for boaters. So hopefully we can do a good combination of that with an implementation strategy.
Is there any discussion of particular mechanisms by which you would enforce it? I mean, are you talking just civil fines, citations?
It's typically done with civil fines, and there's kind of a wide range that other states have used, so we've been trying to look at what's the most successful, kind of that sweet spot of, if you have discharges that keep happening, you want that fine high enough so it's not a cost of doing business versus not being overly fined. We want to find that balance to create compliance instead of discharges. So that number hasn't been identified yet, and that's typically not done until a little later in the process as you're working those elements out. But that's...
And the authority there would be spread
It could be spread
throughout basically any person with jurisdiction out on the water?
No, typically you identify certain jurisdictions, so whether it's like Fish and Wildlife and Coast Guard, or maybe county, You know, so that hasn't again been decided on, but that's typically what is done. It's spread amongst a certain number of those authorities where they would have the training and know what they're looking for to be able to do enforcement for that.
And then, did I get it right that that would require some legislative action to implement that piece?
That part typically does,
Okay.
yeah. That's pretty common with how all the agencies do other type of enforcements. And then long-term, evaluating the success of this, that's really important, and we've learned that from other states, is making sure that throughout time, that there continues to be that pump-out capacity there, that you're evaluating the success, that you're improving on outreach education, whatever elements are needed there. So that would continue in the long term. And on the funding side with that, we would be trying to identify some sources for the long term above and beyond what some of our agencies already do if that's needed. So these are just some of the ideas from the brainstorming session for the outreach education, kind of building on existing things, combination of different efforts to get the word out about where this is and why we're doing it. So I won't list them all off, but one kind of interesting one is the GPS and the app technology. There's a lot of new apps out there, and so many voters too also use their phones out there. So apps that can show you exactly where that pump out is, how long the wait time is, if one's broken, getting that notified to the right people to get it fixed quickly. So those different elements with technology mixed in there. So there's already some of that developed. Some of the mobile pump outs are using that, where you can basically order up and say, I want a mobile pump out at this time in this location. So some of the draft petition itself, this is some of the listing of what's included in there. It's a fairly long document. A lot of maps, but it of course has the proposed no discharge zone boundaries and criteria. It has what's called a certification of need. That's basically your justification for protecting the water body. It has that detailed kind of summary of all the other reports that we've done when it comes to vessel population and pump out information. Summary of the evaluation process, that implementation strategy. You don't have to have all the details laid out, but the strategies, general strategies involved. So we really would love for you to give us your input. Want to hear that. And that will be available, as I mentioned, very soon on our website. It will be right there on the website. We're also doing a news release to get the word out that this is out there to folks. I have a very long list of stakeholders. If you fill out the sign-in sheet, I can add you to that stakeholder list. And so you can get an email when that comes out with a link directly to that website. So you can go ahead and provide your comments. Those will be coming to me through that process.
When you say very soon, is that like within the month?
Yes, definitely within the month. I know I'm not allowed to say the exact date and time, but all I can say is very soon.
Okay, I just, sometimes it's within the month, sometimes it's within years.
Yeah, no, definitely very soon.
Okay, tomorrow maybe.
Don't hold your breath literally, but figuratively.
Yeah, it's been, we were hoping to get it out a little bit earlier, but it's been a little bit delayed. We wanted to make sure we were reaching out to all the folks we want to reach out to and work on that communication. So yeah, very soon.
So when it does finally come out and is published, will there be a widespread news announcement, or will we get, how will the public know that this is there?
Yeah, two ways. A news release, so that will be going out with it, the news release, and we know that there's definitely some media interest in this, so it will likely get out there in some of the papers. We also have, like I mentioned, that stakeholder list that I have, and I can, if you wrote your address on there, I can add you onto that so you make sure you get the email that has the direct link to our website. There'll also be things like on our main page of our website, letting people know this new thing is out there for the proposed no discharge zone and how to comment.
Because you only have 60 days to comment, right?
Yeah, and again, it's not, I mean, the 60 days are typically done more in 30 days. We had some of the stakeholders that wanted to make sure there was enough time for that, so we thought 60 would be a little more reasonable for that.
So how long is the actual petition itself? How many pages?
Oh gosh, I don't know exactly. Probably about 70 is my guess, but about 70 pages.
page it
And that
in.
includes those appendices with like a list of all the pump out stations that we have and
A lot of
maps.
maps.
A lot of maps, we like maps. They show a picture.
And then, so the petition, after the comment period is over, it goes to the EPA, or does it get revised?
Not right
again?
away.
Okay.
We wanna take our time to bring that input in, and we're still continuing to meet with stakeholders. So it wouldn't be right away. We also wanna work on some of those infrastructure improvements that I mentioned, some of those stationary for commercial, to be assured that there are additional options out there. Likely, I would say, and again, I can't commit to a particular time period, maybe about a year. So that'll also give recreational voters and such more time to look at that upcoming possibility out there. And again, it's EPA's decision. We are doing this draft, this is what we're proposing, they're the ones with the final say.
So they could take 6 months on their own if
They
they want
could,
to.
although they typically have done it in a pretty quick process. And they have a public comment period that they go through. It's typically done pretty quickly, although we do have a couple of caveats in there, like the extension for the commercial vessels, that might take them a little more time to evaluate.